Good afternoon, everybody. How are y'all doing? We'll get started in 11 seconds. Actually, when you get a chance, pop onto Blackboard. You will find the week 4 files, and you can start those downloading. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about non-destructive imaging, which basically means making changes to your image without actually making changes to your image. And one of the first things we'll take a look at is converting something from color to black and white. So when you get the files downloaded, you'll take a look in the black and white folder, and you'll see a couple of images in there. I'll give you a minute to get everything downloaded, and then we'll start taking a look at how we can convert this to black and white. You might have noticed, like on your phones, if you have like a DSLR or something, some of those have an option to actually photograph in black and white, or sometimes they'll call it monochrome, mono meaning one, and chrome meaning color. And I think I told you I'm old, like really old. And when I was in college, everything was still film based. So if you wanted to shoot black and white, you actually had to buy black and white film, put that into your camera, and your photographs would be black and white, but you couldn't, like, that was all you got. You couldn't switch them to color. With digital, of course, we can start with color images, we can convert them to black and white. Kind of opens up whole new possibilities. Now, there was something interesting that you could do with black and white film. One of the assignments that we had in college was to photograph something colorful in black and white. You think, what's the point of that? Like, why do you need colorful if there's black and white? But also to put colored filters on the lens, which sounds weird. Why would you put colored filters on the lens if you're shooting in black and white? Well, imagine you were photographing a bouquet of flowers, like there was some roses. So you have red flowers and then green stems and green leaves. When you're shooting in black and white, everything becomes some kind of a shade of gray. So it could happen that the flowers end up a certain shade of gray and the leaves end up the same shade of gray. No contrast difference between them. That would make for a fairly boring photograph. Now imagine you put a red filter over the lens. A red filter will block most wavelengths of light, but it'll let red light pass through. Depending how well made the filter is, sometimes it'll let some other colors through a little bit. Um, in the case of the red rose, it looks red because, you're in a room, all the room and the light falls onto the rose and reflects off of it. The white light has all the different wavelengths, all the different colors of light in it. So it hits the rose, and the rose absorbs a bunch of colors and it reflects the red wavelengths back. Now, those red wavelengths, here's your lens, here's the red filter on your lens. So that red light will pass right through the filter and it will expose the film quite a lot. A lot of that light will get through. The film doesn't know what color the light was. It just knows that a lot of light hit it. And then the light that falls onto the stems, the green leaves, it's going to absorb a bunch of wavelengths and it'll reflect back the green. And when the green light hits that filter, a lot of it will get absorbed. Some of it will get through and expose the film a little bit, but most of it will get absorbed. So in the final photograph, you would have bright colored flowers, fairly light gray, and dark gray leaves. Now you've got some contrast between the different elements of the image. Now you could go the other route, and let's say you put a green filter onto the lens. When that red light passes through, it's going to hit the filter. Most of it will get absorbed. Some of it will pass through. So some of those red flowers, they'll get exposed onto the film there, but it'll be dark, not a lot of light. That green light will pass through the green filter and expose quite brightly on the flower, on the leaves and the stems. So you get the opposite. You have a bouquet of flowers where somebody's holding some light-toned stems and dark flowers on top. A very different feel for the image. And that's just using black and white film. Now, the downside, of course, is you can't change that afterwards. Once you get it processed, what you've got is what you got. Now, with digital, if you're shooting monochrome, if you've told your camera only take black and white, what you get is what you're going to get. But take a look at this. The idea behind non-destructive imaging is that we can make changes to an image without actually making changes. Now, destructive, like if I were to convert this image to grayscale, like right now it's an RGB image, and if I went image, mode, and I switched it over to grayscale, it'll ask, do you want to discard the color information? If I hit discard, it becomes a black and white photograph. But I didn't have any control over, the conversion process. So the original picture, she's wearing a cyan helmet, a reddish magenta shirt. There's some yellow lines on the road. And when it gets converted to grayscale, the line stays fairly noticeable. The red shirt turns kind of a gray tone. The cyan helmet is a slightly lighter gray, but pretty darned close to the shirt. So that's one way of converting something to black and white, but it is destructive. It asks, did you want to discard the color information? So I'm going to undo that. Another way that we could do it is we could simply pull the saturation out of the image. Converting it to grayscale is one way of making it into a black and white image. I could also go under Image, Adjustments, and I could simply desaturate the image. Now you might notice this is a little bit different than simply converting it to grayscale. When we converted it to grayscale, you could still see the lines on the road. Those yellow lines have become, oh, basically the same shade of gray as the asphalt. And the helmet is actually a little bit darker than the shirt. When we did the grayscale conversion, the helmet was lighter and the shirt was a little bit darker. So clearly it uses something different when it does the conversion by going to grayscale or by simply desaturating. Now, non-destructive, again, means making changes to your image without actually affecting any pixels in the image. And a good example of a non-destructive technique is an adjustment layer. Like if you look in my layers panel over here, at the bottom, we have all these different icons over here. And this one right here, the little half gray, half white circle, says create new fill or adjustment layer. If I click on it, ooh, look at all these different adjustment layers that I have. One of them here is called hue and saturation. And if I select that one, I could take the saturation and pull it all the way down. And notice that it looks the same as it did when I did the desaturate, when I simply desaturated the image. But look at the icon of the background layer. This is still a full color image. If I turn off the eyeball on the hue and saturation, all of the original color is still there. Now I am limited to simply desaturating it. What if there was a better way of doing a black and white conversion? I'm going to throw this adjustment layer out, and I'm going to throw on another adjustment layer. This one is called black and white, a very descriptive name of it. It converts the image to black and white. And for the most part right now, it kind of looks similar to having simply desaturated the image. The helmet's a little bit darker, the shirt's a little bit lighter, the yellow line there is about the same shade of gray as the asphalt. But you'll notice in the properties panel up here, there's some sliders, and they're all set to different values right now. Kind of simulating simply desaturating the image. But take a look at this. In the original image, if I turn off the eyeball of the adjustment layer here, I can see the original image. Again, the lines on the road are yellow. Oh no, I can barely see them. But look, we have a slider here for yellows. If I grab this slider and I move it to the right, notice how the yellows in the image lighten up. If I pull it to the left, they darken down. Actually, you can even see on her elbow pads there. The yellow hair and the yellow dress are also affected. So you can kind of target specific color groupings. So let's say this was an ad for this Rascals, this helmet company here, and they want their helmet to stand out a little bit more noticeably than other parts of the image. Well, we know that it's a cyan helmet, so we could go to the cyans here and we could darken it or we could lighten. It's not that it's targeting the helmet specifically. We're lightening the cyan tones in the image. Just like with the yellows, you can see parts of the elbow pads were getting affected as well. If there were other cyan things in the image, actually there's some cyans on the elbow pads there. You can see it affects all the cyans in the image. Now the shirt was kind of a reddish magenta tone. So we could say, well, let's make the shirt a little bit darker to help that helmet stand out. The reds, the magentas. Oh, interesting. Notice how with the reds, it affects her arms as well as the shirt. The magentas, more the shirt than the arms. Huh. Interesting. Anyway, so we can kind of, darken that down. Now that helmet stands out a little bit more. So maybe they were doing a newspaper ad where it's going to be printed in black and white and they want that helmet to really stand out. There you go. We could go the other way, make the helmet darker and make the shirt lighter. But none of this has actually been done permanently to the image. So your first lab today, when you get the folder downloaded in the black and white, non-destructively converting the two images in the black and white folder to black and white. So pop into the folder there, call them both up in Photoshop. And again, we're going to be using non-destructive techniques only. And there's a couple places you can get the adjustment layers. I'm very old, so I go to the bottom of the layers panel. There's that half white, half gray circle down there, and you see the names of the adjustment layers. You can also go to the adjustments panel, and it'll have all the icons and the names of the adjustment layers. So you can grab them there as well. The reason I go to the circle, at first, that was the only place you could get the adjustment layers. And when they gave you the adjustments panel, they only showed the icon. Like it didn't say levels. It just showed that little histogram there. For curves, it just showed the little curve. So you had to know which one you were looking for by icon. Eventually, they gave us the name of it. So you can go to the adjustments if you like. But just throw on a black and white adjustment layer. And play around with the tonality. Like, the sky back there seems to be kind of a bluish, cyanish sort of tone. So if I want the sky to be more dramatic or imposing, I could darken that down, or I could try lightening it up. Um, I took this photograph, and I have to confess, I'm no Ansel Adams. There was a photographer back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, Ansel Adams, and he did a lot of really amazing landscape stuff. He would go around to the different national parks in the States. Did a lot of stuff in Yosemite National Park, Yellowstone, and he was really good at keeping tonality in both the shadows and the highlights. Like if you have a super high dynamic range scene, like a super high contrast scene, it's really easy for the highlights to start blowing out and the shadows to fill in. He was kind of the guy who came up with what they called the zone system, where you could adjust the exposure. You'd figure out the difference between the highlights and the shadows, and then adjust the exposure and the processing time to get the best shadow and highlight information. Actually, when we were talking about depth of field, we talked about Ansel Adams, and he was part of the F64 club, where they thought that everything in the image should be in focus. And yeah, there's his camera. Looks like a 4x5. So it made large format negatives. So yeah, I'm no Ansel Adams, but play around with it, see what you can come up with. And at 12:55, we'll move on to the next labs. And when you're happy with what you've got, whenever we have layers, you'll want to save it in the Photoshop document, PSD. So when you go File, Save As, make sure that the format here is Photoshop. And I'm going to go to my desktop. I'll make a new folder, last name, first name, week 4. And of course, there's the ones from the Monday class. I'll make a new folder on the desktop. Anyway, make a folder, last name, first name, week 4, and just save them into there as a PSD. It's too bad I can't select the whites, because it would be nice if I could brighten those trees up. Oh well.
Maybe they'll add it in the next update.
Maybe, yeah. Actually, we're going to take a look at one adjustment layer that actually does let you do neutral tones, but this one doesn't.
Are the labs going to be due by the end of the class or?
They used to be. Nowadays, because there's an asynchronous option, they're due before next class. So you got a week to work on them.
Oh, okay. Because that kind of confused me a bit, like with like the few minutes left. I'm like, oh, are we supposed to submit this at the end of the
Oh, no, 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 no. It just
class? Oof.
usually like you'll probably have time to get them done before the end of class. Um, but if you want to work on them afterwards, that's fine too.
Okay, thank you. That kind of
Nope.
spooked me for a bit.
Yeah, I like to scare people sometimes. Oh, Aiden, sorry, I saw you just arrived there. Check the group songs. Oh, we're going to do the alphabet assignment later. Right now, we're taking a look at non-destructive imaging adjustments. And actually, you're just in time to take a look at the next lab because it's 12:55. And um, when you start working with clients, I don't want to say clients suck, but they do change their minds about things a lot. So the more you can keep things non-destructive, the more you can make changes to your image without actually making changes to your image, the more you'll be able to accommodate their requests. And when they come back and say, oh, remember that thing that we added? Can you move it a few pixels to the left? Remember the color we changed to this to a different color? Can you make it another color altogether? Using these adjustment layers, using, well, we're going to take a look at in a little bit, blending modes, keeps things as editable as possible. So this photograph here, you guys don't need to do anything on this one, but just follow along on the screen. This was taken by Josh Cornell. I can't remember what magazine it was for, but it was taken at the Hamilton airport. And this is the image as it ran in the newspaper, in the magazine. This was the image as it came out of the camera. As it ran out of the camera. So a very different look to the image, but you'll notice that here's the background layer. This is the only layer that has any image pixels on it. Everything else is some kind of non-destructive technique. Like the first layer here, DB, dodge and burn. Back in the days of film, you would put the negative, you'd take a photograph, it would have a negative, you'd put that into an enlarger, you go into a dark room, which was literally a dark room, put the negative in the enlarger, and it would project that image onto a piece of photographic paper. And then you would put that through the chemicals to develop it, let it dry, and there's your print. Dodging and burning involves lightening and darkening different parts of the image. And we'll take a deeper look at what the process involved, but take a look at this. Here's her eyes, and with this DB layer, it lightens the colored parts of the eye, the iris, and it darkens the pupil a little bit. You'll notice that there's windows all around. When you're in a very bright environment, sometimes the pupils, which are kind of meant to be like the windows of the soul, can get a bit of a grayish cast to them. So what this layer here does is it just darkens down the middle part. And it does that not by painting black, like the layer actually did paint black over it, but there's a blending mode on it. This is normal blending mode where you can see black and white painted over top, but in soft light, it just lightens and darkens different parts of the image. It just gives the eyes a little bit more of an attentive sort of look, a little bit extra snap to them. Here's an adjustment layer, and this is curves where the highlights have been lightened and the shadows have been darkened. When we talk about contrast on an image, we talk about, how bright the highlights are versus how dark the shadows are. And one of the nice things about curves is you can not just lighten and darken the image overall, but you can put multiple points on it. Remember on the histogram, 0 down here is black, 255 up here is white. And if I pull this down, anything that is below this dark 45-degree line has gotten darker. Anything that is above the 45-degree line has gotten lighter. If I wanted to make the image overall brighter, there we go, it's brighter. But if I wanted just the highlight areas, remember, these are the brighter parts of the image. Here's white, so these are the brighter parts, and these are the darker parts. I could put a second point on that curve and pull it down. So now the shadows are getting darker, the highlights are getting brighter, and it gives a little bit of extra snap, a little bit of extra contrast to the image. Now, you'll also notice that looks like a little smudge on this white rectangle over here. This white rectangle is called a layer mask. And a layer mask hides or reveals the layer that it's attached to. Like if I gave a layer mask to this background layer here, and I painted some black on it, wherever I paint black, it becomes invisible. Black hides and white reveals. So on this next curves layer, you'll notice that that layer mask is mostly black everywhere except for on the face and a little bit on the hand over there. What does this layer do? It snaps up the brightness. If we look at the curves here, you can see that it pushes everything really bright. And it gives a nice, almost like a glow to the face in there. Now, this was taken on an overcast day where the sky was very bright, cloudy, and you'll notice that you don't see any clouds out there. It's just kind of blown out to white. So here's a levels adjustment layer, again, with a layer mask, limiting it just to the window that pulls a little bit of a blue tone into the background there. You might also notice that the teeth, quite often you'll find in pictures, the teeth have a little bit of a yellowish cast to them, a little bit warm toned. So this is a hue and saturation adjustment layer that pulls that saturation down to -42. If we increase the saturation, they get more yellow. If we decrease it too far, they get a little bit weird looking grayish, but just, -30, -40. In this case, it was -42, I think it was at. And also the eye, it affects a little bit as well. If I crank up the saturation, you can see that it's affecting these areas too. This is the original. There's a little bit of kind of yellowish tone in there. This pulls some of that kind of bloodshot look out of the eyes a bit. We have another adjustment layer. This one is another hue and saturation that kind of desaturates the image overall. Here's the before and here's the after. Back in the days of film had less gamut, less colors available than we have in the days of digital. So some photographers that come from the days of film will actually lower the saturation a bit to get kind of more of that filmic quality. A levels adjustment layer that gives an overall warmth to the image. And the very last one here looks like it has a black layer mask. Oh, it's only revealing in the eyes. What's it doing to the eyes? Well, she has gray eyes, but now they're blue. Gray, blue. And because it's an adjustment layer, again, clients, they often change their minds about things. So with this, we can go into the hue slider and we can pull that around to any color we want. If we bring up the saturation, we can make it a nice vampire red sort of color. That's a very intense blue. Completely editable. And you're not going to be doing any further damage to the image because nothing had been done to the image to begin with. Here's the original image, completely unaffected. And there's the after with all those changes done to it. So all non-destructive imaging. Here's another example of some non-destructive imaging. This is a photograph that I took in Paris. My wife and I did our honeymoon in Paris back in 2005, 21 years ago. Huh. Anyway, our flight to come back to Canada was crazy early in the morning. So we're getting up and getting to go to the airport. And I liked the light that was happening. So here's the original photo as it came out of the camera. And this is after I did some playing around with it. And again, you'll notice it's all non-destructive. There is a layer here, which is a duplicate of the original layer. And then I blurred it because I wanted that kind of soft focus effect. There's without that layer and there's with that blur. It gives a little bit of a haziness to it. But if I go through the layers bit by bit, oh, you'll notice there's a person walking down the sidewalk here. You can see there's his leg, there's his torso, there's part of his arm, and he has no head. Why do you think this person has no head? Are there a lot of headless people walking around Paris? Or could there be some other reason for it? Is the exposure time. Remember the first daguerreotype was the guy getting his shoes shined, also in Paris, and he only showed up because it was such long exposure, and he stood still long enough. This image, it was again very early in the morning, very dark, and if we get the info on the file here, its exposure time was 1 second. Yeah, it was a long exposure. So in that 1 second, he walked down the street and his head basically blurred into non-existence. Was I going to put up with a headless person walking through one of my photographs? I was not. So I drew a head on there, just, a hazy blob. Like there is, you'll notice like it was a 1 second exposure. And like if you're hand holding a camera, you're not going to be able to hold it steady for 1 second. So you can see there is some motion blur on the image there. So yeah, a little bit of a blurry head is fine. And there's this thing on the other side of the street, this pole that had this very wide concrete base on it. So in addition to adding a head, I got an image of an umbrella and I made a low opacity version of it. And then I made a blurred version of it. And together it kind of looked like the guy's walking down the street holding an umbrella. Nice. And again, it's all on its own separate layers. So it's not like it's, painted onto the background layer or anything. Nice and non-destructive. And then we have some adjustment layers. We have a levels here that you can see from the layer mask is only affecting these parts of the image. And what is it doing to them? Here's without and here's with. See how it kind of snaps up the highlights, like the road gets a bit of a glistening sort of wetter look to it. Basically, it's taking the highlight information and starting to clip it off. Now, if you go too far, you can clip out too much highlight information, but a little bit of it, give a little bit of extra glisten to the roadway there. And then this canopy up above, another adjustment layer that lightens that up. And again, the nice thing about these adjustment layers is they are non-destructive. So if the client calls back and says, can you make some changes to it? Not a problem. Those sliders are right where you left them. And then I did some vignetting, which is where you get a little bit of darkening around the outside edges of the frame. Now, if you're shooting in the RAW format, there is a vignetting slider that you can use to lighten or darken the edges of the frame. Like some lenses tend to be more prone to vignetting than others. And if you don't want that darkening around the edges, you can use that vignetting slider to remove it. A lot of photographers go the other way and they add some more vignetting around the edges. But the problem I find with that is it's really adding it just in an oval shape around the edges of the image. With this technique, notice that the vignetting has been added more here than down here. It's the white that's revealing the effect of it. So I've got a little more control over where that vignetting is going to be. And again, because it's an adjustment layer, I can add more vignetting. I can ease it off. I could reverse it and make the outside brighter. And if I turn the eyeball off, it's not actually doing anything to the image. So you've got a lot of control over the final look of that image. So let's get you guys playing around with some non-destructive dodging and burning. There's a file in there called soft light D&B, dodging and burning. And again, this was a technique that was done in the darkroom. So let's say you were making a photograph and you wanted part of the image to be a little bit darker. Like when you look at this photograph, like your eyes tend to go to the brightest parts of an image. So you might notice, oh, there's a big sky up there, and oh, there's some lights over here, and oh, there's a bright reflection in the road with some pigeons in it, and oh, there's a light over here over top of this quick sign. And then you might look over to the left and maybe you're doing a gallery show with like 10 other photographers. So you've all got your pictures up around the walls, and there's a different photograph beside it. When they get to this little exit point here, they go, oh, what's that over there? And then they decide they like that other image better, and they buy that other image. I mean, ultimately, art, it's about making the money, isn't it? You want them to like your photograph and buy your photograph. So if you can close off those exit points, if you can kind of keep them circulating within your image, they're more likely to like it. In a way, it's like when you first hear a song, on the radio, you're like, it's okay. But then you start hearing it a few more times. Maybe your friends are playing and it starts to grow on you. Same thing with images. The more you look at them, the more you start to kind of appreciate them. So if you could kind of guide your viewer's attention around the image, you could keep them liking it a little bit more. Um, and in the dark room, if you wanted to darken part of the image, you would put the negative into the enlarger, which is basically a projector facing straight down, and it projects that negative onto the photographic paper. So if you're exposing this image onto photo paper, on the negative, remember it's the opposite of the image, this part would be very dark. So it would cast a shadow. It would be very dark on the photo paper. And where the light doesn't hit the photo paper, it remains white. This area would be almost clear on the negative, very light toned. So a lot of light would pass through onto that part of the paper, and so it would get very dark. If you wanted to darken this area around here, what you could do, it's projecting onto the photo paper. If you put your hand under the enlarger, you could block that light. And then if you opened up a little gap in your fingers, you could let a little shaft of that light, that image, project back down onto this area, expose it a little bit longer than the rest of the image, and it would darken down even more. You could expose a little bit more over here. If you wanted to lighten part of the image, like maybe, and when you want people to look at this photograph and think, oh, I wonder what's at the end of the roadway down there. Maybe there's a little bistro or something. You could lighten that part of the image. And that's called dodging. To lighten a part of an image, photographers would often take like a little circle of cardboard, and they would tape it to a thin piece of wire so they could hold the wire, use that little circle to cast a shadow onto part of the image. Less light hits that part of the paper, it ends up lighter in the final image. Now, when Photoshop came around, photographers were very much used to working in the darkroom. They liked the dodge and burning that they could do. So Adobe gave them actual dodge and burn tools. I noticed that they look like their real world counterpart. The dodge tool, it kind of looks like a lollipop, but is meant to represent that little circle of cardboard on that thin piece of wire. And the wire is just so that, if you hold it with your hand, you're going to cast a big hand shadow on there. The wire's not going to cast a shadow, but that little piece of cardboard there will. And the burn tool looks like the photographer holding their hand under the enlarger and then just letting a little bit of light shine through onto the areas where they want to darken it. Now, the problem with these actual dodge and burn tools is that they are destructive. They will do damage to your image. Remember when we were talking about processing raw files? And we said, if you have a JPEG image and you try to lighten or darken, it's limited to 8 bits per channel, which means that every single pixel on one of the color channels has a maximum of 256 shades of gray. And when you try to lighten or darken, remember I said in the for the histogram, instead of thinking of it as black down here, white up here, and the middle slider is affecting the shades of gray, like kind of lightening or darkening the mid-tones. Imagine an elastic string with 256 glass beads on it, a black bead down here at 0, a white bead up here at 255. Any two beads side by side, you pretty much can't tell them apart, just like any two shades of gray side by side on the histogram. They're pretty much the same shade of gray. But if you grab that middle bead and pull it one direction, same kind of thing. If you grab the middle slider and pull it one direction, some of those beads, they're going to shatter and pop off the string. You're going to lose some shades of gray. You'll be doing some damage to the image. So the actual dodge and burn tools, technically a little bit destructive. Even if I were to make a duplicate of that layer and do the burning and the dodging on that. Like let's say, see up in the corner here, maybe I decided I wanted to darken this down a little bit. So I said, oh, I'll use my burn tool here and I'll darken, 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 darken. And maybe you see this little cable that's in here. The client was like, oh, can you also remove that cable? You're like, yeah, no problem. Let me take my clone stamp, sample some of this, and I'll run that over top. And there we go. I got rid of that cable in there. And then you do a little bit more burning. You grab that burn tool and you're like, I'm going to darken this down. Darken, 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 darken. Cool. It is darkened. There's the before and there's the after. But because it was done directly to pixels on this duplicate layer here, if the client calls back and says, oh, it's darkened a little bit too much. Could you lighten it back up? Well, I could pop over to my dodge tool and I could start to lighten that back up. But you'll notice it doesn't look as good as it did. Here's the original unaffected, and here's where it's been lightened up. You'll see it gets a little bit blotchy, a little bit chunky. And you might say, well, that's okay. You've got the original down below. You can go back to that. But the original layer still had that little cable in there. So any retouching that I did is gone. So you can see the damage happening. Yeah, there must be a better way. And indeed there is. And that better way in this case would be blending modes. And blending modes are basically a set of rules that define how the pixels in one layer, and if you look in the layers panel here, we have a layer of a black, white, and a 50% gray. I'm going to say square. They're rectangles. And then some colored stuff down below. The blending modes define how the pixels in the layer that is currently selected, in this case, the black, white, and 50% gray, are going to interact with the pixels below. Like if I switch this to darken blending mode, the rule for darken is the pixels on this layer will be visible only if they're capable of darkening the pixels below. So for the black square here, well, black can darken anything, so it's going to show up everywhere. The white square, oh, well, white can't darken anything, so you'll never get the white square to show up. And the 50% gray, it's visible where it's capable of darkening. So on these gray ramps here, here's lighter tones, here's darker tones. 50% gray is apparently right here. Once this is over something darker than 50% gray, it can't darken it. Once we get it over something lighter than 50% gray can lighten it. Down here, you got the same thing. It goes the other way. The gray ramp there can darken, it's visible. Can't darken, it's not visible. Now, if I switch it to the opposite, darken, the opposite of that would be lighten, we get the exact opposite. The white will never get it to go away. The black will never get it to show up because black can't lighten anything. And the 50% gray only where it's capable of lightening. And all of these blending modes are just different sets of rules for how those pixels are going to interact. Adobe has very graciously kind of divided them into sections for us. We have here, these will always give you something darker than you started with. These will always give you something lighter than you started with. And these will kind of play around with the contrast of it. These are the weird ones. You'll see when you start playing around with blending modes. These ones have very weird effects. And these are the ones that affect only specific aspects of the pixels. Like for hue, you'll notice that, oh, the squares are gone. Well, they're not. They're still there. There they are. It's just in hue blending mode, they can only impose their hue onto the pixels below. And black has a hue of, well, no hue. Same thing for white and 50% gray. So they're imposing their hue onto the lightness down below, but that's all. They're not imposing their brightness or anything. If I put them up here, there's the black. It's imposing its hue of well, no hue onto the gray scale, onto the colors behind it. 50% gray is also imposing, well, no hue, and so is white. Same thing for color, saturation, luminosity. Interesting. With luminosity, it's imposing its not brightness. Luminosity is similar to brightness. It says, okay, black has a luminosity of nothing, so it shows up as black. 50% gray says I have a luminosity of 50% gray, so it shows up as 50% gray. White, white. When I put it over here, oh, black shows up as black because I mean that's as dark as the luminosity can get. White shows up as white because that's as bright as the luminosity can get. 50% gray shows up as colors. That's weird. And look, it's darkening the blue. Blue is a very dark color. It's not very luminous. Cyan is more luminous. This 50% gray is imposing its luminosity. Here it's imposing its luminosity onto something that's darker, has less luminosity. It's less luminous than 50% gray. Here it's imposing it on something that's lighter. Yellow is a very luminous color. So when you impose that 50% gray luminosity on it, it comes out looking very kind of grayish. Interesting. How can we use that to our advantage for dodging and burning? Well, let's say I were to make a new transparent layer. So at the bottom of the layers panel there, I just click that little plus sign. If I were to take a paintbrush and paint with, say, some black paint, there we go. And then paint with some white paint, there's some white paint over there. And then for, some reason I decided to paint with 50% gray, which would be right in between 0 and 255. So it would be 128. There's some 50% gray. Again, each of these different blending modes, a different set of rules. And let's say I switched it to, well, darken. The black you'll always see the black. The white, you'll never get it to show up. The 50% gray, only where it's capable of darkening the pixels below. So anything darker than 50% gray, it can't affect. Anything lighter, it can. Now this one's interesting. If I set it to soft light, blending mode. The rule for soft light is anything darker than 50% gray will darken the pixels below. Anything lighter than 50% gray will lighten the pixels below. And 50% gray itself does absolutely nothing. We can't see the 50% gray there. Cool. So if I wanted to do some dodging and burning, if I wanted to lighten and darken different parts of the image, I could take a paintbrush. And if I had some black paint on it, now it would be full intensity right away. It darkens it down. If I want a little bit more control over it, I could play around with the opacity. Let's say I did like 30% opacity. Again, fast way of changing the opacity, just hit 3 on the keyboard. 5 gets you 50%. But at 30%, I could darken around here. I could darken over here. I could do a little bit of darkening around here. Don't worry about the pigeons. Who cares about pigeons? I could close off this little exit point over here. I could darken the sky a little bit. But if I turn this layer off, nothing has actually been done to this image. So I'm able to darken in a non-destructive way. Here's my original image. Here's the darkening that I've done on this separate layer. Now notice I'm using a paintbrush. If you do want to use the actual dodge and burn tools, like when I first make this layer, it's transparent. And the dodge and burn tools work by darkening existing pixels. So if I try darkening these non-existent pixels, nothing's going to happen. So a lot of people, they try this, they get the dodge and burn tools, they're on the transparent layer, they get it to soft light, and they're trying to lighten and darken, and nothing's happening. But remember, in soft light, 50% gray did absolutely nothing. So if I were to fill this layer with 50% gray, when I hit OK, nothing happened. Like in normal blending mode, well, you see it for what it is, but in soft light, it's completely invisible. If I then took the actual dodge and burn tools, if I go to the burn tool here, I actually have some pixels that I can darken. And if I want to lighten, I can go to my dodge tool and I can lighten it up. So that's a perfectly valid way of using this dodging and burning technique as well. I like to work on a paintbrush on it simply because I can just hit X on the keyboard to switch back and forth between black and white, between darkening and lightening. Just makes it easier for me, but whatever works for you. So I'm going to do a little bit more darkening around here. And this is actually your second lab. So when you pop into the week 4 folder, you'll find the dodging and burning. Don't worry about these two images. Those are just for the demo, but the image soft light D and B dot PSD will make a new transparent layer. Maybe I'll call it D and B, dodging and burning. Never a bad idea to name your layers as you go. And from the pop-up here where it says normal, I'm going to switch it to soft light blending mode. Then I'll grab my paintbrush, hit B on the keyboard. And you do want to make sure that you have pure black and pure white as your foreground and background colors. So just hit D on the keyboard. That gives you your default colors. And there's some black paint. Do make sure also that you have the hardness on your brush set to 0. If you have a hard edge brush, you can do dodging and burning, but you'll notice that you see these very distinct marks at the edge of the brush there. So you want to make sure that your hardness is all the way down at 0. Now you can do some lightening and darkening and you don't see those hard edges. And for mine, I'm going to darken these signs. I'm going to darken the pigeons a little bit, some vignetting. And maybe the story that I want to tell is, hey, what's at the end of the roadway there? Maybe there's a little bistro or something. So by hitting X on the keyboard, I got some white paint, and look at that. I can lighten up off in the distance. There's a before, and there's an after. A very different story being told on this image. So play around with it. 121 now. At 127, we'll move on to the next steps, the next images. And if you've already darkened an area and you want to kind of remove some of that darkening, if you just hit X on the keyboard and get some white paint, you can paint back over top of it. And I know what you're probably thinking. Wait a minute, isn't that destructive if you darken and then lighten and then darken and then lighten? Except that no, because of the non-destructive nature, we've never actually affected any pixels on that layer. So you can jump back and forth between lightening and darkening just by using a paintbrush, X on the keyboard. And if you are using the dodge and burn tools on that 50% gray layer, oftentimes you'll find that the Option key or the Alt key, if you're on Windows, reverses what a tool does. So while the dodge tool lightens, if you hold down the Option or the Alt key, it can actually darken. Oh, except that I don't have any 50% gray on here. But you get the idea. If you had a 50% gray layer, if you hold the Option key, the burn tool will dodge, and the dodge tool will burn. 1 minute and 43 seconds, and we'll move on to the next image. I saw stuff in the chat there about the assignments in Dropbox and stuff. What we're working on right now, the labs, it's just a chance for you to, try the different techniques and stuff that you might be using in some of the future assignments. They don't get submitted to Blackboard. They go into the Dropbox link, which will be on each week. There's a PDF file that tells what the labs are, and then there's a Dropbox link at the bottom there. When you click on that, you can upload them to that. But if the assignments, like the rule of thirds, the contrasts, the alphabet that you're going to be getting today, are those last week? The portraiture that you're going to be getting today. Yes, 4 assignments in the first 4 weeks. I'm that kind of person. They get uploaded to Blackboard.
Sir,
Yeah,
can I ask you something?
sure.
So, somehow I didn't realize we had to submit the lab files, and I didn't even know where to submit them. Is it too late for me to submit week 1 or 2, or is it
No,
fine
no.
if my...
As you get them done, throw them into the Dropbox. Yeah, if they're a little bit
Yeah,
late, that's fine.
yeah, I'm sorry. I actually didn't realize, like, we had to do these things. I was confused till, like, literally now.
That's okay. If you want to go back over the lectures, like if you've missed one of the lectures, the recordings are posted on
Yeah,
Blackboard, so you can actually watch those too.
yeah. I'm gonna get the week 1 and 2 labs posted today, and I'll get the other stuff done.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, thank you for understanding.
No problem. Okay, so save up what you got and notice on mine here, here's the before and here's the after. It's quite the noticeable difference. It can be, oh, and also, you'll also notice on this image, see at the top there, there's a black and white adjustment layer. It was actually a full color image all along. Again, that's the beauty of this non-destructive stuff. You can work on a black and white image, but if the client's like, oh, we want to do a color version, there's the color version right there. Or you can kind of play around with some of the little settings in here. Yeah, all kinds of ways of non-destructively changing stuff. The last non-destructive thing that we'll take a look at before we take a look at the assignment is selectively changing colors on things. Um, like imagine you were doing a job for a client and there's a banquet hall and they're like, hey, what would it look like if we, painted the back wall orange? Well, you could paint the back wall orange, or you could use a layer mask and an adjustment layer. Um, and simulate what it would look like. Like one of my friends has a video production company, and he was thinking about getting one of those Sprinter vans. So we went to a place, he photographed a gray one, and then I used a hue and saturation adjustment layer and a layer mask to reveal it only where the vehicle itself was. And we could try any color we wanted on it. You know, when you go like to like an online store and they have like a shirt and you can see it in, pink and teal and yellow and red and orange and stuff. You're like, oh, how did they make each single shirt pose it exactly the same, all the wrinkles and stuff? They didn't. They just used Photoshop to change the colors on it. And then we played around putting his logo on it and things like that. And yeah, it's a nice, fast way of previewing what something would look like. So in this case, take a look in the folder, selectively changing colors, and I'll show you a couple of adjustment layers that let you kind of target specific color groupings. The last one that we're going to look at, the actual lab, this one here, the lab.tiff, will be the one that you hand in. But imagine, just follow along on the screen here. Imagine you were doing a job for a client, and this is another picture I took in Paris as we were trying to get to the airport. There's my wife buying some croissants at the best croissant shop in Paris there. And the client's like, yeah, it's a great photo, but nobody's up that early. Could you make it look like it was a little bit later in the morning? Well, there's an adjustment layer called selective color where you can select specific color groupings. And here they actually do let you select whites, neutrals, and blacks, but also reds, greens, blues, cyans, magentas, yellows. So if they were like, can you make it look a little bit later in the morning? Well, the sky, if that could be lightened up a little bit, it's not white, neutral, or black. It's a sky, so it's probably blue and maybe a bit of cyan in there. So if I went to the blues here, what can we change about the blues? Well, we can change the amount of cyan, magenta, yellow, or black in the blue tones of the image. And depending what version of Photoshop you've got, if it's a newer one, it'll probably show the colors that you'll go to. Like cyan, remember when we talked about additive and subtractive color theory? Each of the primaries has an inverse color, an opposite. And the opposite of cyan is red. So if we subtract cyan, notice we're going down to minus 100% cyan, it looks like there's some red. It looks more like actually magenta being added, but that's because, the tones that were left behind. But we can play around with the amount of cyan in the blues, the amount of magenta in the blues. Hey, if I subtract magenta from the blue tones in the image, it kind of looks like it's a little bit later in the morning. And the nice thing about this, I didn't have to do any masking. Like notice it's not affecting the sidewalk. It's not affecting the lights in the image. What it is affecting is the sky and those white shutters around the windows. They're picking up that same color because they were the same color of blue. So whatever we do or of the blues there, it happens to the windows as well. Well, that's kind of cool. Yeah. And maybe the client might say, oh, and these lights in the foreground, they're way too yellow. Can you ease some of the yellow out of these lights? Well, if we pop to the yellows here, I can say, yeah, let's take some yellow out of those lights. I could add more yellow to the lights, or I could subtract yellow from the yellow tones in the image. Maybe they don't like how red the glow around here is. I could pop into the reds and I could add some cyan to the reds, which kind of subtracts red. And there's before and there's after. So you can kind of target specific color groupings. Now, one thing you're not going to be able to do with that technique is like spin it right around to a completely different color. Like if they were like, oh, can we make the sky a nice, orange sunset color? No. I could go to the blues and I could kind of shift it one way or another, but I'm probably not going to be able to get it to like an orange or a red color. Yeah, it's kind of a purpley. No, you need something with a little bit more kick to it. And that brings us to the last lab for today, the IMG3231 lab.tiff. So call that one up and imagine the client has said, oh, he called you up and said, remember that picture we took of the girl with that red flower around her neck? Can you turn that flower blue? With the selective color, probably not. But with another adjustment layer, this one called hue and saturation, we probably could. So I'm going to call up a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And at first, it looks like nothing's happening because none of the sliders have been moved around. But if I grab this hue slider and I start pulling it one direction or another, you'll notice that the color of that flower is changing. I'm going to pull it maybe around here. And like, oh, that's a very nice blue color. Let's talk about what this adjustment layer is doing. Because we think, okay, but the flower is blue. I guess we can send it off to the client now, except that, oh no, the person has turned purple. When we're moving this hue slider, you'll notice first off that it has all the colors of, well, this part of the color picker. This is the hue slider on the color picker here. And it starts at red, orange, yellow, green, into cyan, into blue, magenta, and then back to red on the other side. And when this is at 0, when there's no change done to the image, we have two little rainbow things along here, and they're actually opposites of this one. Instead of starting at red, it starts at cyan. Instead of going to yellow, it goes to blue and all the way through. If I spin this around right to the other side, notice how, first off, this bottom one, see how there's the two little sliders there, the bottom moves relative to the top one. And basically, the bottom one is saying what the colors are now. The top one is saying what the colors were. Like this red flower around her neck, you can see it was a red color. There's red. If we look down to the bottom one, red has become blue. And her skin tones would have been somewhere around here, and skin tones have become, oh, purple. Well, there's the problem there. Now, I just want to show you something interesting about that hue bar along there. Notice if I pull it all the way to the left, it says minus 180. If I pull it all the way to the right, it says plus 180. When we're talking about grayscale, we go from 0 to 255. If we're talking about saturation or brightness, it's often 0% to 100%. Let me show you what's going on here. In the color picker, which is what we can use to, pick color, we have this little square over here, which gives us different saturations and brightnesses of whatever hue is selected in this bar here. And if you go to the very bottom here, notice it starts with a hue of 0. And RGB values, like if I grab perfect white over here, it says RGB, the red channel is 255, which is white, green channel 255, blue channel 255. If I grab black, red, green, and blue are 0, 0, 0. But if I go to the top right here, like the H and the S and the B here, the saturation is how close to pure the color is. If I go to the very left side over here, notice the S is 0. Anything on the very left side of this box is going to be some kind of a shade of gray. And as I move to the right, you can see that saturation increasing until we get to saturation 100%. The brightness is how dark the pixels are. If I go to the bottom, brightness of 0, you're always going to have black. The whole bottom thing along here is always going to be black. But as I start going upwards, you can see that the brightness starts to increase. And by the time I get to the top right, it's the brightest, most saturated version, 100% of each, of whatever color, whatever hue is selected here. Now, as I start moving this slider up, you can see that hue changing. Hue is now 80. Now it's 100. Oh, past 100. 120, 30, 230, 240, 250, 255. Oh, no, we can go right past that. All the way up to 300, 310, 320, 330, 340, 350. Oh, back to 0. 0 at the bottom, 0 at the top. And if I go down by 1, 359 before it goes back to 0. So there's 360 possible stages on that, which is no coincidence, because if you've ever looked at a color wheel, let me just find a color wheel. There we go. An RGB color wheel, you'll notice, remember we talked about colors having opposites. Here's red on one side, there's cyan on the other, and then red, and then there's orange, yellow, there's green, there's cyan, there's blue, there's magenta, and it comes all the way back to red. Oh, just like the hue bar did. Started at red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, all the way back to red. Basically, this hue bar from 0 to 360, they go back to 0, 360 degrees, there's 360 degrees in a circle. It's this color wheel snapped at red, stretched out into a line, and placed over here. And that's why there's 360 possible hues on this. Only 100 for the saturation and brightness because it's in percentage, and 255, well, 256, 0 to 255 for the RGB because that's 8 bits per channel. So upshot here is if we wanted to change the color of this flower, we can grab this slider, pull it around until the flower turns blue. And again, here's those bars that will show you what the original color was, red, and it has become blue. Skin tone has become magenta. If there'd been something bright green in it, it would become kind of a reddish tone. There you go. Now, what do we do about the fact that she's purple? Well, you'll notice that every time you make an adjustment layer, it automatically gives you a layer mask, which of course can hide or reveal the layer that it's attached to. In this case, it's attached to the hue and saturation, so it is revealing the color changing effect of that layer. If I were to take a paintbrush and paint some black on that layer, I could remove that color changing effect from everywhere that isn't the flower. Now that would take a really long time. Might be easier, since it's only this area that needs to be revealed, to simply fill this layer mask with black and then paint white to bring it back. I could go edit and fill, and for contents, I could choose black, and voila, it fills that layer mask with black. Although there's a keyboard shortcut for it as well. It's not filling with black, but if I did image adjustments and then invert, when you invert something, it basically turns it into a photographic negative of whatever it was. So like, blue becomes, or red becomes cyan, black becomes white, white becomes black. If I invert this layer mask, image, adjustments, invert, oh, the white becomes black. And you also notice that there was a keyboard shortcut for invert, Command I or Control I if you're on Windows. So if you're making an adjustment layer and you only want to affect a small part of the image, when you make the adjustment layer, it'll automatically have the layer mask selected. Do whatever it is that you need to do. In this case, we pulled it around until the flower was blue. Select the layer mask and Command I. That will invert it. Now, ultimately, we're going to have to bring back that blue everywhere that there's flowers. So with white paint, I could paint, 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 paint. I do need to be careful though, because it's not as big of a deal here. Like if I overspill into the background here, it does give a little bit of a green fringe. But if I overspilled here, you can see that it really changes the color of the shirt. So probably I would want a fairly small brush, and trying to fill this whole thing, that would take a really long time. I'm going to show you a few ways to get that flower revealing that blue effect across it. You could try the automatic tools, like the auto selection techniques. Like if I did select, actually, no, it won't find the subject because I'm on the layer. If I click on her layer and I do select subject, will it find the flower? What the subject is a bit subjective. For us, it's just the flower. For the select subject command, it chose all of her. So that's not going to work. What if we did the object selection tool? If you hit W on the keyboard, it takes you to where like the magic wand and other things hide out. And one of them is the object selection tool. And with the object selection tool, when you hover over your image, it will try to find things that it thinks are objects. You can see it says finding objects in your image when complete. There we go. Now, when I hover over, it finds a nose, eyeballs, lips, the flower. So if I click, it selects the flower. Now, in this case, it also got, like if I fill with white right now, and again, white will reveal the color changing effect. So if I fill the selected area with white, Oh, it also kind of messed up this thing around here. Of course, you're finding objects in the image. You've already found them. So it was a bit of a rough mask. And you can see it missed some bits of magenta around here, like bits of the red around the edges. Which is not bad. The tools are improving. Like it did miss a big fringe around here. It missed the whole shadow around here. Yeah, I don't think that's quite something that we can use as a finished piece. I often find that the auto selection tools miss so much that you spend as much time kind of going back and cleaning it up afterwards as if you just kind of went in and did it by hand anyway. Like if I, again, selected my layer mask here, took a paintbrush, and with some white paint, I could paint around the outside of these flowers here. I could kind of outline them. And actually, I don't know if I've shown you guys the shift clicking technique before, but if you click in one place and then hold down the shift key and click somewhere else, boink, it jumps in between those points. So if I was trying to cut out around this flower, I could shift click my way around. And notice I'm using a brush that has a hardness that's about the same hardness as the edge of the flower. So I can kind of get right in there and do a clean job of cutting out around. If it was a softer edge, maybe it was like slightly out of focus or something, if you go with a larger brush, you can get a softer edge on that brush. So for this fairly small brush, and if it's a fairly curvy area, you can kind of freehand it. But when you get into those straight edges, shift clicking can be a nice fast way of kind of jumping around the image. I'm going to do a bit of a rough job around here, a bit of a quick job, so it won't be as perfect as it could be. But when I'm cutting things out for like the kids' magazines, Owl, Chirp, and Chickadee, I often use this technique. It is longer, but you know that you're not going to miss anything. Again, when you start working with clients, not only are they going to change their minds about things, they're going to notice if you miss something. So if you do an auto selection and it misses like a little piece of a flower, or it misses cutting out somebody and their part of their arm gets left behind, it can be small, it can be almost unnoticeable. But when they do the large print, let's say it's for like a bus shelter where it's going to be printed like 7 feet high, suddenly that stands out. So you're probably better to zoom in, get everything. Like notice how I got these little bits over here, but the auto selection tools had left little bits of red on the end there. Make sure you get everything, do a proper job of it, and always keep that client. Now, for this technique here, it does have to be a solid line all the way around. So like these little necklace bits here, I didn't kind of jump across. I did a solid right across it there. And when I come back to where I started, if I zoom out, it's a nice solid outline all the way around. If you want to use some of the auto selection tools, feel free, just zoom in, take a good close look at the edges and make sure that it didn't miss anything, clean up anything that was roughly done. But if you want to try this outlining technique, I'll show you the next steps. We get what looks like the outline of Australia maybe, or maybe a bat that flew into a window or something. But if I take my magic wand tool and I click in the black area in here, now I have this whole inner part selected, and I can fill that with white. Now, you might notice there is a bit of a problem. There's this little pink fringe around the outside. When I did the selection, whoops, cancel. When I did the selection, I used the magic wand tool, and it works by selecting whatever you click on. In this case, I click on black, boink, 0. It picks 0, and anything within whatever the tolerance is. This has a tolerance of 32. So anything within 32 levels of 0. Anything brighter than that, it doesn't select, which means it got black. Here's everything within 32. All of this stuff, it didn't include. So when I filled that with white, we were left with that fringe. A way around that, we can modify selections after they're made. I could go into the select menu and I could modify it by expanding it. And I'll guess at 4. Yeah, you can see that it jumped outwards into that little into the middle of that white path there. If I hadn't gone far enough, I could just add a little bit more. If I went too far, like the whole point of using that soft edge brush was that this matches the softness of the flowers that I'm cutting out. If it went too far, undo it, Command Z, and just take another shot at it. It's a bit of an iterative process. But once I've expanded it and it encompasses that fringe, then I can fill it with white. And voila, there's the layer mask revealing the color changing effect on the flowers. And because I looked at every little part of it, I know that it's a nice clean cutout in every area. Now, it is not perfect. Like if I look at the little necklace thing over here, that should probably also have some of the blue on it. Not a problem. I can take a larger brush and I can reveal some of that color changing effect over those areas, maybe over this part around here. And same thing, like this white or this, well, teal color is picking up some of that reflection. I'll pull some of that blue into there as well. In the shadows, the reason the shadows were originally red was because, again, the ambient light in the room, all the colors fall onto the flower. It absorbs a bunch of wavelengths, reflects the red back to the camera, which is why we see this stuff around here, but it also reflects some of that red into the shadow areas. So once we turn the flower blue, we should probably also include those little shadows in there. Remember, you can change the size of the brush using the square brackets to the right of the P key. The right square bracket gets you a larger brush, and the left square bracket gets you a smaller brush. I'm just pulling some of the blue back into there. And the last thing, her chin. Yes, it should probably get some of that blue tone. Like her chin wasn't really this red, it's that flower reflecting some red into there. Now that it's blue, it should probably reflect some blue. Now, I don't want to just do that because that's not very convincing looking. This is where the the fact that a soft-edged brush basically gives you a gradient from full intensity to nothing. Like if I paint something with a soft-edged brush, here's a large soft brush, bump, notice that it's full intensity in the center and it fades out to nothing outside that ring of the brush. So if I only used half of the brush, like if I wanted to have just a little bit of it affecting up in here, if I start down inside the flower and rise upwards, see how I've got that gradient from full intensity out to nothing. And if I were to lower the opacity of the brush, here I am at 100%. If I knock it down to say 50, I could bring a little bit of that color changing effect back onto the chin. You see, I can just pull, just kind of waft a little bit of that effect in there. Now it is coming in maybe a little more purpley than one might have expected. If you need to get rid of some, if you hit X on the keyboard, you can paint some of that away. X again, you can bring a little bit more back. You can try lower opacities, maybe like 20% or so. And from a distance, that's not bad. There's before and there's after. And you can see that, that chin is picking up some of that reflection. And the nice thing about this technique, if the client does call back and say, oh, remember that image where we took that red flower and we changed it to blue? Could you make it, emerald color? You can say, yeah, no problem. Here's my adjustment layer. There's where the slider was. If I pull this around, there's a nice emerald color. And you can see that the reflection in the chin also changes in real time. Maybe they say they want it to match her shirt. I could pull some of the saturation down, and there we go. Now it matches her shirt. There's before, and there's after. So for this lab, make that flower any color you want, and then save it up into that last name, first name, week 4 folder. And then we'll talk about the assignment that you're going to get, and then I'll kick y'all out. It's 1:51 now, 1:55. We'll move on to the portraiture assignment. How's everybody doing? Should we do a quick break as well? Let's do a quick break. It's 1:51 now. We'll do a 10-minute and a bit. So at 2:15, we'll move on to the next. No, 2:05. 2:05. Yeah, that'll be like a 10-minute, 12, 13-minute break. 2:05, we'll move on to the next step. Feel free to use the washroom. Feel free to check your Facebook, whatever it is you kids do these days. And at 2:05, we'll move on. How's everybody doing? Any questions? Okay. Again, don't be afraid to zoom in, take a good close look at what you're working on. Can you also use the lasso tool in this case? Yeah, you probably could. Let's say I make a hue and saturation adjustment layer around to there, invert it. You'd have to be pretty precise around. Now I've got a feather radius set on mine. The thing about the lasso tool is it does create a fairly hard edge selection. And the polygonal that you were talking about, if you hold the Option key, you can kind of with a kind of the straight line around. It could be a starting point. Um, but I think probably the layer mask might be the better way to go. Like you can see it's a fairly jagged looking selection. If I come back around to the start here, and if I fill that with white, yeah, you can see it has a very jagged look to it. If I'd had a slight feather radius on it, you can see that 0 pixel, so it gives a very hard edge. I could simulate that by blurring this. I could do a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. I can soften that edge there, simulate looking at using a softer edge brush. And I don't have to be looking at the layer mask to do it. I can be looking at the image as long as I have the layer mask selected. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Hmm. But at that point, you kind of have to clean that up anyway. I guess if you did a really precise job with it, yeah, it could work. I feel like maybe it's a faster start. It can be, but sometimes the faster start slows you down in the long run. Like if you started painting a room by opening up the paint bucket and just sloshing it against the wall, it would probably take you longer in the long run to get the whole thing done and cleaned up. 2 more minutes. If you have to use the washroom, go now or forever hold your pee.
A tragedy that Shakespeare couldn't come up with said joke like that. To pee or not to pee? That is the true question.
Nice. So start saving up what you got. Make that folder last name, first name, week 4. Toss it into there. Okay, and before we take a look at the assignment, there was one more image that I wanted to show you. Um, I've done a lot of work for magazines, clothing companies, and oftentimes they'll be photographing their styles well in advance of when the catalog actually comes out. So you'll often have like the fall line photographed in the spring or sometime in the summer. So here's an example. Like let's say the client wanted this to look like a fall scene. So these leaves, they shouldn't be green anymore. They would have kind of like a fall color sort of look. The hue and saturation, you could go in and kind of paint color onto each of the individual leaves. Make sure you don't accidentally get it on the subject here. But that selective color lets you select specific color groupings. And the leaves, if I went to the greens here, I could say, well, let's push some red tones into the greens, and let's take the green, let's add some magenta into those greens. And it's like, oh, that's actually having surprisingly little effect on the image. Sometimes it's not necessarily the colors that you would think. Like the greens there are actually, they have quite a lot of yellow in them as well. And if I do the same thing, pull out all the cyan or crank up the red in it and crank up the magenta in it, that looks much more like a fall scene. So it looks like in that case, the yellows actually had more of an impact. But notice it's not affecting the skin. It's not affecting the jacket because we're using just that selective color. Now, something is that is affecting that it probably shouldn't. These evergreens here, so called because, they're evergreen. Fortunately, there's a layer mask. Every adjustment layer comes with a layer mask. And if I were to grab a paintbrush, and I probably wouldn't want to hit it at 100%. Like I could, hide it completely, but sometimes you can get a bit of an overly harsh look to it. So if I knock the opacity down 50%, I can start pulling some of those green tones back into those evergreens. Maybe a little bit around here as well. Yeah, so there's a summer scene or a spring scene turned into a nice fall scene. So you got a lot of control over where those different effects are going to be applied. Now, the assignment. We have a portraiture assignment coming up. And let us talk a little bit about portraiture. These notes were written by Richard Fisher. He's the guy who actually created this class many, many years ago. And some portraits become iconic. Like I think we talked about this one back in the first week. Steve McCurry was the Afghan girl. And you look at the lighting on it. Like it was taken in a classroom. There's the windows reflected in the eye there, the shadows from the inside of the classroom falling, and a little bit of serendipity. Like, this girl had the beautiful green eyes with kind of the reddish brown in the center, the red hood, the green shirt with the green background. Everything just kind of worked out. There's a video that we found on They actually went back and found her about 10 years later and kind of filmed her again. But yeah, old paintings like the Mona Lisa is a portrait. The smile has captivated people for centuries. Where did the eyebrows go? Who knows? But it's a portrait just as much. So what is a portrait? Basically, it's a likeness of somebody's face. It can be just the face. It can be a full body portrait. It can be just the waist up. It can be whatever you need it to be. Should show a bit of their personality or their character, kind of giving the viewer a sense of who that person is. Usually it's considered something to be flattering to the subject, and it's a collaboration between the photographer and the subject. Here's a famous one by Yusuf Karsh. He was a famous portrait photographer in Ottawa. And in 1941, Churchill came to talk to Parliament. And after the speech, oftentimes when you're doing portraiture of well-known people, you don't have a lot of time with them. So we had a couple of minutes with Churchill here. So when you're doing something where you're in limited time, you want to set up as much as you can in advance. So you want to make sure that if you're using supplemental lights, you have the lights all ready to go. Your focus is set. Your camera's on a tripod. You've got your composition all laid out. And in this case, the photo session was only to last 2 minutes. I'm reading from the Wikipedia page here. I saw a video where Karsh was talking about taking this photograph. Karsh asked the Prime Minister to put down his cigar as the smoke would interfere with the image. Churchill refused. So just before taking the photograph, Karsh quickly moved toward the Prime Minister and said, "Forgive me, sir," while snatching the cigar from the subject's mouth. Carr said, "By the time I got back to the camera, he looked so belligerent he could have devoured me." Now, this photograph was used all over the world, and the expression on his face was always kind of assumed to be particularly noted for his posture and facial expression, likened to the wartime feelings that prevailed in the UK, persistence in the face of an all-conquering enemy. But no, he was just pissed that the photographer had taken his cigar out of his hand. But this was like, Life magazine. It was used all over the world. Karsh sold a lot of prints of it, signed them, a famous photograph. Now, when you're making a photograph, usually the eyes are considered kind of the most important part of it. As long as the eyes are in focus, it's considered a sharp portrait. If you're photographing outdoors or, maybe window light or something and the light is shining on the person's face, the pupils, they're basically the apertures of the eyes and they'll close down and you can get kind of a beady-eyed sort of look. So sometimes if you have the subject kind of close their eyes for a few moments before you take the shot, when they open them up, those pupils will have opened up a little bit. But you can see here, it's a very hard light source. You can see the reflection of the light, a little pinpoint of light, the hard shadows cast on it. Really shows up kind of the texture of the skin. On the left here, we have two portraits. Actually, it's two half portraits, so I guess it equals to one. There was a big trend in the early 90s for movie posters, which just show like, half of the person's face. But yeah, that's fine. You got the eye showing up, the crisp detail in the hair there. Now on the right, here's playing around with something that modifies the light. You can use reflectors, supplemental lights. Anything that modifies the light is called a light modifier. In this case, it was a little crystal that had the light kind of shine through. Yeah, you can play around, have some fun with it, do a little bit of experimenting. If it's a fairly dark environment, those pupils will tend to open up and you can get a bit of a vacant look. So if you have them look into a bright light before you take the shot, some cameras actually have a red eye reduction mode where it'll kind of flash the flash before it takes the picture, and that'll close the pupils down a little bit, and then it'll take the main photo. The thing I find with the red eye reduction is a lot of people think that when that red eye, the pupil closing flash goes off, they think that's the picture, and then they look away, and then the main picture is taken, and you get, a lot of photographs of people like, looking around. Try to have the camera at the same level as your subject's eyes. Like if you're photographing somebody who's sitting in a chair, you wouldn't, stand over them and look straight down. You'd probably crouch down, get about the same height. If you're photographing children, you don't want to be staring down at them. If you're photographing upwards at somebody, it might think, it'll get, if you're trying to give them a sense of height, a sense of grandeur, maybe, but usually you try to stay about the same eye level, the same level as your subject's eyes. Pay attention to the details when you're cropping an image. Like when you're taking the photograph, if you're not including, let's say you're trying to do a full length, but you're not quite getting the top of the head there, depending on how that's going to be used, that could go very badly. One of the schools I teach at in the fitness center, they have a banner with the volleyball team. They've all been cut out and put onto this background. And one of them, their head had been cropped off in the photo. So in the cutout, the top of their head is perfectly flat. So you always think about, the little details there. Is the person kind of, crouching, leaning back, maybe got a little bit of a double chin there. Sometimes angling the face downwards as opposed to upwards, we get that kind of snooty look. Downwards can give a little bit more of um, a focused sort of look. Extending the neck can remove some wrinkles near the chin. Here's a portrait of somebody who loves his birds. And you can see on the left, this is the outdoors. So you get the light shining onto his face over here. There's his apartment on the right, and you get the shadowed side in there. So you get nice contours of the face. When the light comes straight from the front, you get a very flat sort of look to it. Side lighting, it really shows the contours, the modeling of the face there, the texture on the hands and the little bird sitting in his hand there. Yeah, kind of gives you a sense of who the person is. Think about how you're going to be cropping it. Avoid shooting downwards on children or short people. Um, if you're photographing somebody straight on, it'll kind of emphasize their width. Sometimes if you turn the body a little bit towards, kind of away from the camera, you can get a bit of a narrower sort of feel. And think about the posture. A lot of photographers in their studios will actually have posing chairs where it doesn't have a back on. It's basically a backless stool, or maybe it'll often have a little armrest that clips into the front that people can kind of lean on. But you want to try to usually avoid that shoulder hunching. If it's somebody sitting in their office and they're kind of sitting in their office chair, oftentimes you'll find that if someone kind of slouches a bit, they kind of sink down into their jacket. Have them sit up straight, pull everything down, make sure that everything looks nice and put together, and bend the joints. Like if somebody's standing looking straight up, arms straight down, legs straight down, everything perfectly straight, it has more like a mugshot kind of feel than a nice portrait. Like here we've got, standing straight on, so she has a little bit of a wider look, arm straight down, but that bend on the arm gives a little bit of personality there. And you'll notice on the lighting, it's outdoors on a sunny day. You can see the light shining onto the hat up there. You can see the light shining onto the arm, and you can see the hard shadows being cast. But she doesn't have any hard shadows because she's in the shadow of the brim of her hat, which gives a much softer light. So instead of the hard sunlight shining onto her, she's being illuminated by the ambient light in the greenhouse around her. Here we've got, whoops, again, turning the torso just a little bit. See how when it's straight on, you kind of see the full width. When you turn the torso a little bit, gives it a bit of a slimmer sort of feel. Here she's turned completely 90 degrees to the camera. And for the lighting, remember she was in sunlight. You can see there's her face there. She's in the shadow, but the sunlight is reflecting off her hat. She's also in sunlight, but it's behind her. She's backlit. See, there we go. You can see the light shining through. I should probably try trying to zoom in there. There we go. You can see the light shining through the hair there. So she's illuminated again by the ambient light around. If the photographer being on the other side and she had turned around 180 degrees, she'd be in the full harsh light of the sun. Now on the left image here, notice it's an overcast day. There is no sun. Like on an overcast day, if you look at your shadow, you probably don't even have one. On a sunny day like her, if she had moved out into the sunlight over there and held up her hand, you'd probably be able to count the number of fingers on the shadow of her hand, a very hard light source. For him, very soft light source, making very soft shadows under the eyes, under the chin. Now, the background behind the subject, a lot of studios will have just a plain white wall, or some studios will take a roll of what they call seamless paper. This is just regular paper, but you can roll it down the wall and across the floor. And they call it seamless or no seam because there's no seam between the floor and the wall. If you have the subject stand on that, it's almost like they're just kind of floating in a white void. Although maybe it's somebody at their work. You want to kind of show what they do for a living. Like you should be kind of trying to say something about the person, give a little bit of information about them. So if it's in somebody's office, there could be stuff on the shelves. There could be something on the desk in front of them. Feel free to tidy things up a little bit. Like if somebody's desk is a real disaster, maybe, oh, can we just tuck this into some of the drawers over here? Can we move this out of the way? But including a bit of their environment can kind of give a sense of who that person is. If you're in an environment where you don't have like a plain white wall or something you can shoot against, just bringing a large sheet and some thumbtacks can make a nice improvised background. Now, you'll find entire books on lighting styles. side lighting, split lighting, backlighting, loop lighting. Probably the most famous lighting style is Rembrandt lighting. So it's a light high into the side, so the light shines onto the subject, and a little triangle of light appears on the opposite cheek. So you can see the light is shining onto this side of the face. The nose is casting a shadow, and the nose shadow is meeting up with the cheek shadow, leaving that little triangle in there. Called Rembrandt lighting because it was used by Rembrandt in a lot of his paintings, and apparently by other people because this is a portrait of Rembrandt when he was younger in the Rembrandt style of lighting. Lighting modifiers, like a lot of light sources, just got a strobe light here. If I take the reflector off, you can see this is called the modeling light. This light here is on all the time. The little ring on the inside is the actual flash. So that's the flash that goes off, and it's fairly small, so it's going to have a fairly hard quality of light. A lighting modifier is anything that modifies the light. And something like this reflector, if I clip the reflector onto it, notice that it is now a larger light source. This foil in here will catch a lot of the reflected light and send it out in a much larger light. An even larger light could be adding what this photographer has done, a softbox onto the outside of his light. You'll notice at the back of the light here, that's the actual strobe, fairly small light source. So it's shooting into this box that has that same foiled surface on the inside. And then there's this white sheet, sometimes called a scrim, placed across the front of it. And that catches the light and basically becomes a light source that, in this case, it looks like it's probably a 24 by 36 inch light box. So it becomes a much larger light source, which gives a much softer quality of light. Now, whether the horns on the portrait there were intentional or not, but notice how the shadows, very soft edged across there. Now, this is almost a Rembrandt. If that light had been a little bit further to the side, maybe more almost kind of behind him a little bit more, that nose shadow would have met up, kind of made that triangle of light. Some people call this loop lighting because I guess the nose makes a little bit of a loop shape in there, but you can see that nice soft quality of the light. And in the reflection of the eye, you can see that rectangular shape of that giant rectangular softbox in there. And it doesn't have to be a softbox. A lighting modifier can be even just a simple sheet of paper. If you got the light shining on one side of the face and it's really shadowed on the other, a little bit of a sheet of paper can just reflect some light back in. You can get silver foil reflectors. They kind of fold up into a small shape. When you pop them open, they become much larger. They can be white on one side, silver foil on the other. Some of them will have gold foil color to reflect a nice warm light back into the subject. Again, it can be a piece of paper. If you go to Dollarama for like $1.25, you can find those white sheets of foam core. Those make great reflectors as well. Here's a very warm toned light and a very soft quality of light. You can see that soft Rembrandt light on the corner there. Also a Rembrandt, light is coming from the other side. It's a much cooler tone of light, plus it's a much harder light source. Like look at how hard edged that shadow is. It really reveals the texture of the skin. And the contrast of this image, like a lot of photographers, like I said, they'll have, white walls. They'll often paint their walls black. Like let's say you want like total control over the lighting in your studio. If you paint the walls black, food photographers and stuff will often do this. You don't have to worry about stray reflections, playing around with the contrast. If you want reflections, you can put a reflector there if you want to open up some of the shadows. But if you take that reflector away, look at that. You can't even see where the head ends and the background begins. Nice hard contrast. Some photographers will use velvet curtains that they'll kind of pull to put behind the subject to simulate a black studio. Now, a lot of cameras, and here's an example of a DSLR that has a flash on the top. So that flash would pop up. Right now it's hidden behind the Nikon logo there, but it would pop up and it's small. It's only like a half a centimeter by maybe like 2.5 centimeters wide. So it's going to be a very small light source. It will make fairly hard shadows. The white balance will have a lot to say with the overall feeling of the image. Like you can see that this has a very warm sort of feel. This has a much cooler sort of tone. So the white balance will play around with kind of the emotions that you might feel about it. Overhead lighting tends to look more natural. Like lights typically come from above. The sun is up above on an overcast day. The sky is up above. Unfortunately, the flash on the camera is coming straight from the front. A lot of wedding photographers will get an external flash. I've got an example of one here, and it just clips into the top of the camera. Get in there, you. Unlock it. And basically, it's a larger light source. Notice it's much larger and much wider. Plus, it's not right above the lens. It's a little bit higher, so you get the light coming down a little bit more onto the subject. Plus, if you're shooting indoors and you have a white ceiling up above, you can actually tilt the flash upwards so it will shine onto the ceiling and you'll get that light coming from above. Plus, because it's illuminating a large part of the ceiling, you get a much softer light falling down onto the subjects. So there's all kinds of camera gear that people can get to modify the way the lighting on the scene is going to look. In addition to like the different focal length lenses, that lighting from the side gives the more a natural kind of, you see that kind of shape of the face. And actually with these flashes, you can also turn it sideways. So you're taking a picture this way, it'll shoot to the side, hit a wall, and reflect that light into the side of the subject. So there is a lot of control when you have these external flashes here. Here's an example of a fairly simple studio setup. And again, it's clearly not a studio, it's somebody's living room. And you might have noticed, like when you were a kid, if your, friends, parents had a, south-facing window, they would often have those white sheer curtains in front of the window. Um, they didn't block the light, but they diffused it. They gave it a much softer quality. And that's what they've done here. This is a south-facing window. You know how the sun rises in the east, it moves through the southern sky, and it sets in the west. So it shines in those southern windows. You can see how hard it's reflecting off of the floor here. So to give a softer quality of light on the subject, they've hung some of those white sheer curtains across here. They have some blackout curtains that they can pull if they want more control over the lighting. And behind, they've, very professionally taped some of those rolls of no seam. So there's the roll, they've stretched it up onto the wall, taped it up above. Now again, they come in 4-foot, 9-foot, and 12-foot wide rolls. It looks like they have two 4-foot rolls that they've taped side by side there. And yes, from where he's sitting above the umbrella, you would see the seam where these things are taped together, but that would be easy enough to Photoshop out. But notice how she's standing on the background, so you don't see the seam between the floor and the wall. It's a nice seamless blue behind her. So yeah, it doesn't have to be horribly complex. Here is some lighting, side lighting. The light's coming in from the window here. And I suspect, looks like the wall is painted white, which you would expect would reflect more light into the dark side of the face here. But it's probably also a very large studio. Like the farther that light has to travel after it comes in through the window before it reflects off the wall and comes back, the more, the darker it's going to be, the more of that light you're going to lose. Here's quite the opposite. This person's sitting on a seamless, and it's probably not seamless paper. It looks like there's a bit of a dent in there. Some photographers will actually go so far as to blend one of the walls into the floor. So the floor is painted white, and they'll often take bits of plywood, and if you score plywood, you can bend it into a curved shape and then some supports behind to hold it in place. And some photographers will actually have behind that little cove, a tube that they can pass electrical cables through. So you can have the light on one side and the light on the other without the light going across the cove. And yeah, look at he's sitting on the floor. There's the wall behind. And on the shadowed side, here's the light shining onto this side of the face, but some of it is reflecting off of that cove, off of that white surface, and filling in those shadows. So you get nice open shadows in the background there. And no obvious sense of where the floor ends and the wall begins. Two more half-face portraits. Notice the very shallow depth of field on this one. The eye is in focus. You can see the eyelashes there, but the fingers are out of focus. Even the tip of the nose is slightly out of focus. The ear is out of focus. That shallow depth of field really draws your attention towards the eye there. And on this one, they've kind of used the lighting to give that half face effect. So the light's coming from this side over here. And again, black background absorbs any of that light that falls onto it. You can't even see where the other side of the face ends. But notice how that very hard quality of light gives you see the texture of the skin. You really see a lot of detail in that image. Now, the focal length. We talked last week about, zoom lenses, telephoto lenses, wide angle lenses. When you hear about the focal length of a lens, usually it's with reference to the old school 35 millimeter cameras. Negatives back in the days of film were 1 by 1.5 inches. And for a negative of that size, a normal lens, something that's going to take in the same sort of field of view as human visual system sees, would be around a 50, maybe a 55 millimeter. If the sensor is smaller, like on your phones, you might have noticed that, the lens on your phone is like this big because the sensor is really tiny as well. It's not that film size sensor, it's a tiny little sensor, which means that that 50 millimeter focal length would be like super telephoto. It would be super huge compared to that tiny little sensor. And similarly, the 4x5 camera that I was using when I was in college, with that negative being 4 inches by 5 inches, a normal focal length for it is around 250 millimeters. Bigger sensor, bigger film, longer focal length, bigger lens would be needed. But when we talk about focal length, usually we're kind of saying the equivalent of on a 35 millimeter camera. So 80 millimeters or more on a 35 millimeter would be considered a long lens. A wide lens would be 35 millimeter or less, a wider angle lens. Normal lens around 50 millimeters, actually. Here's an old Yashica. This is a film camera, and you can see, I think I might have shown you guys the inside of this one. There's where the film went, 1 by 1.5 inches. And the lens on it is a 50 millimeter f1.9. So this would be a normal lens. Telephoto would be longer and wide angle would be shorter. And the length of that lens can really change, like we saw, like how it changed people's portraits, people's faces. Long lenses will tend to give a more natural perspective. Telephoto lens or wide angle lenses will tend to give a bit of a fisheye, a bit of a distorted sort of look. So again, 35 millimeter cameras, 80 to 135 is considered a good portrait lens. Long lens, wide aperture, always going to be a good bet. That wide aperture lets you get that very shallow depth of field so that the attention really gets drawn onto your subject. Like the guy kind of hiding his face there. You could see his eye was in focus, the tip of his nose, and his ears were already going out of focus. And if you look at old like 1920s, 1930s, 1940s Hollywood glamour photography, it often has that very shallow depth of field because again, they were using large film cameras, usually 4 by 5, 5 by 7, sometimes 8 by 10, 8 inches by 10-inch negatives on those things, which meant that it had a very shallow depth of field. And they tended to have to use large apertures because they're often using just the stage lighting, which wasn't as bright as, outdoor or the flashes that would come later. And again, short lenses tend to exaggerate the nose. So here's an example of a short lens, a wide angle lens, and you can see how the nose seems kind of bulbous a little bit in the front there. This was the example that I showed last week with one of my students. This was a wide angle lens, so I was maybe like 2 or 3 feet away from him. I was so close that I was looking upwards into his hat and downwards at his goatee. But the first picture that I took when I was still 50 or 60 feet away, instead of 18 millimeters wide angle, it was 200 millimeters telephoto. And you can see how like the nose and the ears are about the same size. Here, the nose is much larger than the ear. You get this sense of everything kind of getting pushed apart with the wide angle lenses. With the telephotos, it kind of pulls things closer. Like he wasn't any closer to the wall here than he was here, but the wall, the bricks look huge compared to here where you can see the whole wall behind him. It's just that compression and expansion effects of the lens. And the aperture, like the larger the aperture, f1.4 is one of your larger apertures, you can get just that one part of the image in focus. When you close that down, f22, you could have the entire image in focus. And again, it's kind of odd that the large aperture has the smallest number and the smallest aperture has the largest number. It's just that that f is a fraction of the focal length. So if you have a 100 millimeter lens at f2, you would divide it by 2, so you'd have a 50 millimeter aperture. At f22, you would have like a 4 millimeter, 4 point something millimeter aperture. And depending on what the use is, it doesn't have to be something completely serious. Like you probably wouldn't have someone for their LinkedIn portrait sticking their thumbs in their ears and sticking their tongue out. But kids, yeah, have a bit of fun with it. Hands. When I was in college, I really hated trying to use hands in images because I could never figure out how do you get them in there that they don't just kind of look like this thing kind of squishing the face around. Um, Much like arms and legs, if you bend the fingers, like, a hand like this, kind of blah, but turned, you can get some more gracefulness to it. Try not to do the thing where you kind of lock the hands together. Like it like doubles the size of the hand. You get this real like big chunk of meat kind of feel. You want a certain gracefulness to it. Now, when you're posing groups, you tend to want to have, stagger the head height. Some people will be taller, some people will be shorter. Um, and you might have noticed, like, when, school portraits and things like that, the photographer would come right in and start kind of moving people around. Okay, you come into here, you stand over there, you turn this way. Don't be afraid to get in there and kind of pose each person one at a time in relation to each other. Now, there's a little list here of things that you can do if there's, some kind of an issue you want to try to resolve. Like if somebody has a bit of a roundish or a fat face, you can turn them a little bit. Sometimes if you use what's called short lighting, like when you turn your face, you have the broad side of your face towards the camera. If you light the broad side of the face, that's referred to as broad lighting. That'll tend to make the face look a little bit wider. If you light the short side of the face that's turned away from the camera, it'll help kind of slim things up a little bit. Thin faces have them look straight on. Noses, raise chin slightly. If somebody's wearing glasses, you often get like reflections in the glasses. You can take the lenses out, or sometimes just lifting the arms a little bit. If you just do it a little bit, it can take that reflection in the glasses and get rid of it without looking like something weird has happened. So those are some little solutions to potential problems there. Again, that flash on the camera, it's really close to where the lens is, so that light will go straight into the subject's eye, reflect straight back into the lens, and you get a bit of a red eye in there. It can reflect badly off of somebody's retinas, making them seem bright red in a photograph. It's fairly easy to fix in Photoshop, but if you're doing like a wedding or something, you don't want red eye all over the place and having to fix that all over the place. So again, some cameras have a built-in red eye reduction mode where it'll flash the lens a few times to close that pupil, less chance of it reflecting off of the back. There's an example of that red eye. It's just the pupil's so large and you can see the reflection of the light source there, like the flash itself. So it just went straight into the pupil, hit the retina, came straight back. Some animals like cats, you get green reflections. People get red reflections. Don't be afraid to ask to rearrange props. Again, if it's an environmental portrait, like somebody in their office and there's, work cluttered all over the place, don't be afraid to ask them, can we move this over here? Can you tuck that back into the briefcase? Can we put this in the drawer? Use your intuition. Here's a picture of, this is actually in the middle there. There's Richard Fisher, the guy who created this course. And in this picture, there's some things in the scene that could maybe be gotten out of the way, make it a little bit cleaner looking. Now, again, you probably won't have a lot of time with the subject, like especially if you're doing it, commercially, you need to get on to the next person, or maybe it's a well-known person who's like in the middle of a meeting or something that you got a little bit of time in between. You want to, first off, have everything ready to go. Set your focus, your aperture, your shutter speed, have everything ready. And then when they arrive, you can just start shooting. If when they arrive, they're waiting for you to, get everything set up, they're kind of standing there, they're gonna get a little bit bored, and that's going to show in the final photographs. And while you're shooting, engage the person in conversation on one of their favorite subjects while keeping the camera pointed at them. If they're just standing there, you're like, okay, pose. And they just kind of stand there. That's all you're going to get from them. But if you're chatting, if you're talking about things, sure, some of the images, their mouth will be open, maybe they'll be blinking, but you'll get better images overall. And just like we said for the first assignments, take a lot of photographs. Just keep shooting. And sometimes there's a little bit of, quality through quantity. Some people call it spray and pray. Just take a bunch of photos and get the best you can out of it. But it doesn't matter, if the lighting isn't working, if the composition isn't working, it doesn't matter how many pictures you take, you're not going to get something good out of it. So carefully plan before you start shooting. If you want to go black and white, feel free. We took a look at how to convert them. Just make sure you do it in a non-destructive way. Keep the adjustment layers on there. But yeah, black and white photos can add some starkness, some drama, a little bit of emotion to a photograph. Here's a photograph of the late Jimmy Carter. And notice the light is coming from above. So it's not coming from the side, but because it's coming from above, you do still get it shows the lines, the wrinkles, the years he's been through. So yeah, black and white can be a nice way to to send things, to do stuff. Step away from a wall. If you have your subject standing right in front of a wall, first off, it can kind of look like a mugshot, and you might get some shadows kind of falling onto the wall that really kind of gives away what the overall studio is there. And yeah, don't neglect the hands. Consider including them. They can often make the photo more expressive of who they are. Here we have a photo again taken by Richard, and the top is an example of, look at that, like, putting them together like that, they look huge. Like it's the same size as their faces there. But look at the other hand. It's turned. The fingers are bent. It has a more graceful sort of look to it. So hands can be used nicely in portraits. Now, a lot of cameras will have a portrait mode on them. There. Like on the top of this one, you'll notice, where is it? Yeah, where'd it go? There. That lady with the hat on the right beside the word scene there. That's the portrait mode on it. And basically, when it's in portrait mode, the camera will do all the calculations. It'll calculate the exposure, and it will also, you can see there's the portrait mode on a Canon camera there. In portrait mode, apertures are kept as large as possible, so the smallest f number, to produce a shallow depth of field. So it'll give that nice blurred background onto there. And again, it'll deal with focus and things like that. And some cameras are at the point now where it can recognize the subject, and you can say, okay, take the photograph when they smile or when there's a certain amount of smile in there. The focus, you can have it automatically focus on the eyes. Yeah, they're getting better and better as time goes by. And again, shoot from a kid's eye level. Let your photos show the world as it's seen by the eyes of a child. So Richard traveled to China a lot, and this is a picture that he took of some kids playing in the street there. And you can imagine if you kind of walked over, stood over them and took a picture, it would be a very different feel. By crouching down, the viewer, in a way, kind of becomes a part of the crowd. You kind of feel like you're there. You're one of those kids. Play around with your perspective. Like maybe you could shoot from above. Here's a girl studying for her psychopathy test there, and the camera is basically mounted to the ceiling, looking straight down. Interesting view. Here's floor view. This is a picture by T. Rish, and there's her camera. That's actually the camera that's taking the photograph, and there's a mirror in front. It's the sliding mirror on a closet there. And you're like, wait a minute, how's she triggering the camera? I think she has in her hand a remote trigger to take the photograph. But yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Feel free to break the rules of composition. Some people think of them as like suggestions of composition. So here, yes, she's tucked over in one side there. You get nice use of the negative space on the right side over here. Play around with the lighting. If you have a fairly hard light source, like this, on a sunny day, you could, break off some tree branches and hold them up to cast the shadows of the leaves on the face. If somebody's walking through the forest, you'll get that beautiful dappled light kind of coming through the leaves. What some photographers will do is they'll take like large pieces of cardboard or Bristol board or something, and they'll cut little kind of blobby shapes in it, and let the studio lights shine through those to simulate the dappled light coming through the trees. Here's some vertical blinds casting the light onto the side of the face there. Experiment, play around with it. Here, the light is actually behind the subject. You can see it's kind of coming more from the behind, lighting up the tip of the nose here. The shadow of the nose is being cast onto the side. You're getting just this kind of rim of light. Another image where the light is completely behind the subject. You can see it shining through the hair, shining through the smoke on its way to the camera. But there's another light in front illuminating the face. But you can see how hard that light is coming in from behind. You can see those hard reflections. Don't be afraid to move your subject out of their comfort zone. Here's another photo by T. Rish, another self-portrait, and she caught herself in midair. Now, how did she do it? Well, there's that inner thumb. You can see the remote control there. Now, where are the lights in this scene? Well, if you look on the bottom left here, you can see a hard shadow of this lamp being cast on the wall, and you can see a shadow of her being cast onto the ceiling. So there's a light down here on the floor, and there's also a light down here on the other side. You can see it casting a shadow of that lamp on the wall and casting a shadow of her feet onto the wall over here. So she's got two lights shining in on her there, and she jumped, hit the button on the remote, and there we go, caught midair. Doesn't have to be perfectly serious. Again, this might not work for the CEO of a company in their annual stock report. But yeah, have a little bit of fun with it. Maybe get some props into there. There's that same girl with blowing a bubble in there. Again, kind of making use of that negative space around the subject. Play around with the backgrounds. Like we said, not to lean them against a wall. They kind of did that here, but in a way, it also kind of works. Like he is kind of looks like he's kind of exhausted, slumped up against the wall, and because it's not a flat wall behind him, it's actually in a corner. Notice how the lines kind of point inwards towards the subject. Like these ones lean downwards, pointing toward his head. These ones lean upward, pointing towards his head. These lean down. They're all kind of focusing in on the center there. So yeah, experiment, play around with it. Play around with the format. Maybe you do a horizontal or a vertical. Your cameras nowadays are high enough resolution that if you shot this as a horizontal image, you could then go in and maybe crop a little vertical image out of it as well. Again, I'm old enough that I remember when a 6 megapixel DSLR was $47,000 and you wanted to use every single one of those megapixels. Nowadays, with like 30, 40 megapixel cameras and phones, you can shoot wider than you think you need and just kind of crop inwards if you like afterwards. Play around with it, experiment. Maybe give it a bit of a tilt on your camera. In filmmaking, this is called a Dutch tilt, where the camera has a bit of an angle to it. And it introduces, in filmmaking, a little bit of unease or something's a little bit off about the scene. They call it a Dutch tilt because it was used a lot in German films, and I guess they got Dutch and Deutsch confused. There was a movie by John Travolta called Battlefield Earth, and it took a little bit of flack for using the Dutch tilt in a lot of the scenes. But in a still photograph, she's jumping in midair. It's unusual, and it adds a little bit of dynamism to it, and also these strong diagonal lines of the image. Yeah, experiment, play around, maybe bring some movement into it. Here we have somebody leaning against the wall, standing very still, but it looks like this is probably a few seconds of exposure because the person on the right was moving around, shaking, moving their arms, and you get this like super chaotic sense of movement on the person on the right there. Here's somebody standing still during a bit of a longer exposure and letting the world move around him. Again, you get that sense of calm amongst the chaos. Play around with subject expressions. They don't have to be happy in the portraits. Maybe you're trying to give a sense of drama. You got a little bit of sadness going here, or maybe kind of confusion, bemusement. And notice the use of the rule of thirds here. It's placed over off on that one side there. But yeah, you got the nice shapes of the hats, the colors, the blues and the greens. And yeah, it doesn't have to be super happy. If you're doing a face shot, feel free to fill the frame. Again, if you're doing like a full length, you want to make sure you include, the top of the head in case it's used somewhere else. But if you're doing a tight face shot, yeah, fill the frame. Zoom in there. Here the subject is facing away from the camera. They've turned their head to the side and you're kind of catching them mid-glance to the back. Again, you can see that soft quality of the light. You can see the shape of the softbox that's casting the light and those very soft shadows on the face there. Yeah, kind of holding the edge of the podium, leaning forward, that very warm tone to it. You can put a lot of feeling, a lot of emotion. You can say something about the person. Here she's reading a book, 101 essays that will change the way you something. But there she is under the trees. And again, you can see that sunlight shining in, but she's in the shadow. Much softer quality of light. The out of focus leaves in the distance and in the foreground here. She's got her sunglasses. Yeah, it kind of says something about her. Maybe don't fill the frame. Here we've got the person kind of tucked at the bottom. Maybe it's a poster, an ad or something where they want some room for some text in there. Or maybe you just want to leave that negative space. Play around, experiment, have some fun with it. So for the assignment, you will find it in the week 4 folder. And yeah, you're going to arrange a portrait session with someone you know. Could be a good friend, could be a member of your family, maybe. Use any means at your disposal. Available light just means the lighting that's in the room, outdoors, whatever. Flash if you like, bring some props in, whatever's in the surroundings, to obtain a portrait that conveys the subject's character. So there's some notes around here. You can feel free to read through those, but I'll show you some examples of what people have come up with in the past. Now this one, we said, don't put them against the wall because you might get a shadow on the wall. In this case, it kind of works. You see the outline of the cat and the subject and the person there. Sometimes breaking the rules is okay. Well, I'll open this one up in Photoshop because there's an alpha channel there. There we go. So this is a window light portrait. So she's sitting by the window. That hard sunlight is coming in. You can see that shadow of the nose that's been cast. And the use of the tones, like you've got the bright white here, you've got the dark of the wall, the dark white here. So you get dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. You get these nice bands of color, the diagonals, and the book that she's reading very close and out of focus in the foreground. It kind of, again, it gives you kind of a sense of who this person is. Now, this one was up against a wall, and notice everything's kind of vertical. Again, it kind of feels like maybe a bit of a mugshot. They just kind of say, stand there to take your photograph. You want a little bit more dynamism in the image. And same thing here, like, a portrait isn't just you, stand there, click. They were standing right under one of the ceiling lights, actually two of the ceiling lights. How do we know? Well, he's casting two shadows, one over here and one over here. And the eyebrows, the cranial ridge, is casting these shadows, given this like raccoon mask thing going on in there. So, yeah, it should be more planning than that. Again, standing against a wall, it just kind of, and everything's very vertical. You want to have that more dynamic, pose, the more dynamic expression. The sunlight, the dapple light was nice, but just the way it was coming through, it almost kind of looks more like, kind of a blotchy, badly done beard or something. But the depth of field, notice how there's that very soft, bokeh in the background. Nice work overall. Just be careful the way those lights, the light falls on. Now, being a portrait, you should probably be able to see the person's face. Like here, we're not even sure if they know that their picture's being taken. And being a portrait, you really should be able to see the face. This was a mascot for some team. And if you'd been hired by the team to photograph their mascot, then this would be just fine. But for a portrait assignment, you should probably be able to see the subject's face. And yeah, for a portrait assignment, you really should be able to see the subject's face. This kind of takes away from some of the portraitudinality of it. Um, this one, it's actually not bad. It is a little bit chaotic in the background. You often want a bit of a simpler sort of background. And the fact that she's in the shadow of the awning of the building there kind of makes the background very bright and kind of, again, when when you look at a photograph, your eyes tend to go to the brighter parts of the image. So you kind of get distracted away from her. But her pose, notice the arms are bent. Yeah, nice portrait. Um, I think that should do it. There was some. Uh, I have got all of the rule of thirds graded yet. We'll take a look at those next week. But I think that should about do it. How is everybody doing? Okay, so that's about it. You got the labs. Make sure you get those thrown into the Dropbox. You will find the link for the Dropbox every week at the bottom of the week, whatever PDFs. In this case, it's week 4, and there's the Dropbox link down there. Now, Dropbox does support folders, so you can just drag the folder into there. It'll ask for an email address, and that's how you submit the lab files. The assignments, when you go to Blackboard, Blackboard does not support folders, so you would just have to zip the folder. But you can deal with that when you get to it. The assignment is in there, the handout, the labs. I think that's about it for today. How's everybody doing? Any questions? Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording. And if you do, oh, Esma, question.
Yeah, quick question. For the labs for today's lab, do we just do the photo with the lady with the flower and then another one? Was there another
There'll
one?
be, actually, if you look on the week 4 PDF here, your labs involve non-destructively converting the 2 images in the black and white folder to black and white. So both of these, same as PSDs, make sure you keep the layers on there. Um, and then retelling the story of the soft light D&B in the dodging and burning folder. So for this one here, I did some darkening around the edges, some lightening around here. Retell the story however you like. And then the last one, selectively changing colors. We're going to change the color of the flower around the girl's neck. So that one there, we made that into a blue flower. Okay. So it should be
Okay.
4 images all told, and there's the Dropbox link.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. So I'm going to stop the recording.